The NBA season is right around the corner, and that means it's time to start talking position battles for the Detroit Pistons. We're going to talk all about the bigs today, Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, and more. We're going to answer some of your questions off of social media and a whole bunch more as we get through our mailbag and we get started for the regular season on this edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, and join me this week, not in Italy, is Aaron Johnson. Aaron, how are you doing, my friend?
You know, I'm doing well. I wish Jasper was here, but he's busy off in Italy scouting out the next Gabriele Procida, the next Simone Fontecchio. So, you know, we'll give him this week to go out there and do his thing out in Italy. I actually think it might be a 2-week trip, so he might not be back next week either. He's really scouting a lot of games out there, but doing well. And look, I got the email today about media day for the Pistons. It's like that. That is the sign that basketball is back. Like it's only a few weeks away. I am super excited to have NBA basketball on the horizon, and I know we've got a good show today. Got some listener questions. We don't always get those, but had some come in via Twitter, and we're going to talk about all those along with some other stuff. Really excited to get into everything.
Yes, we have a lot to get to. We love answering questions, and it's time to talk about some positional battles and some rotation stuff, starting with the bigs. And of course, if you are a subscriber to our Substack, you've already received the article from us about the big man rotation and what that could mean. So make sure that you are subscribed. We're going to do our little pre-show plug first here, and then we'll get into our sponsor for this week. We should start with our own stuff, and our own stuff is on Substack. So if you haven't subscribed to our Substack, it's going to be in the show notes wherever you listen to podcasts. It's going to be on YouTube in the description. You're going to find it on any of our social media handles as well. You'll find a link to our Substack where you can subscribe for free. You'll get content 3 days a week, starting on Monday with the weekly drive. Wednesday, there will be some form of an article. For the time being, it's going to be preview stuff. Like, for example, the Bigs preview had come out on Wednesday, and everybody who has subscribed would have gotten that right in their inbox. And then every Friday, you get the podcast. And maybe there's some more stuff that's coming with Media Day. You know, we might have to do a little supplemental post as well, because there's going to be a lot of information coming fast and quick. So if you are not subscribed, please subscribe to us on Substack. Watch the podcast on YouTube, if that is the preferred method, if you want to watch us, but subscribe to us on Substack. It does mean a lot. The support, especially right around now as we get into NBA season, means a lot to us. Aaron, I don't know if you wanted to add anything since, you know, you got the email for Media Day.
No, I mean, look, need the support now more than ever. Season right around the corner. But yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't be subscribed to the Substack, because this big piece from Dylan Edenfield, who also is the maestro behind our podcast graphics every single week. He's been doing that for years and does a phenomenal job with them. He wrote this. He's a really talented writer. We're going to talk today on some of the discussion points that he brought up in the piece, but I'd highly recommend that you go check that out and subscribe to the Substack, because we're trying to do some great things over there and write some cool stories. So need your guys' support there. But look, Mike, I think I'm ready for you to make us our money with our ad read, and then we can get into the show.
All right. Let's get right down to business with our business. And that means thanking this week's sponsor, BetOnline. And BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. If you think you know your stuff, you can get in on the $200,000 mega contest. Pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. $1,000. And when the game's over, you can head on over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of 150 slots games. So head on over to the website today, get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. Okay, let's get right into it with the positional previews. So the plan is we're going to have forwards and guards coming out the next 2 consecutive Wednesdays, I think, unless something happens. But the centers had come out 2 days ago. For those of you who are listening on Friday, it came out this past Wednesday. And like Aaron said, it's a very good piece. Center and power forward is kind of an interesting sort of grab bag for the Pistons. There's a lot of question marks. We've talked about Jalen Duren being a bit of a question mark and what he needs to do to be better. We've talked about Isaiah Stewart for like 3 years now about what he needs to do, to be better and sort of fit better. And then you also have B-ball Paul Reed, who comes in as a guy who backed up Joel Embiid for several years. He played a lot of starter minutes when Embiid was injured last year. So he's definitely got the pedigree of, he can handle a workload. And then you have Bobby Klintman, who was drafted, I think, 43rd overall, right? 42nd overall, in the 40s.
Now I got to look it up.
Aaron is checking, but he was arguably the most impressive player during Pistons Summer League. So does he find his way onto the court at all? We're going to get into all of that. But the bigs rotation, I think, is really it's one of my big questions, no pun intended, because there is so much potential in moving on from, 1 or 2 of those guys, if it seems fit. So Aaron, let's start with the rotation for bigs, unless you want to talk about Dylan's piece first, because I think it's a really good overview of the centers and the power forwards.
No, it is. I think where we should start with this is just kind of laying out how we feel the rotation lays out. And it's important to note, when we're talking about the bigs, we're not talking about, guys that could be playing power forward or small forward. Like Tobias Harris isn't included in this. Ausar Thompson isn't included in this. Simone isn't included in this. It's really just the centers on the roster and Bobby Klintman, who's probably a 4 right now, maybe plays some small ball 5 if he ever puts on some weight. But he's kind of just included in there as that 4th guy because I guess a little preview for, I think, how everyone feels on Klintman right now. He's probably not playing many NBA minutes this season, at least not until the back half of the season at best. But I think when you look at the bigs rotation and you tier it out, Jalen Duren's up top. He's the top dog without a question, the starting center going into the season. Tier 2, Isaiah Stewart. Started for Detroit the 4 last year. I think based off what we've seen and heard, the plan is for him to move into a bench role this upcoming season as the backup 5. But then you also have Paul Reed, who the Pistons claimed off of waivers, and it was an $8 million contract that they claimed. They didn't let him clear waivers and head into unrestricted free agency to try to sign him to a cheaper contract. They picked up his $8 million salary because they liked him so much. So I think if you look at the center room this year, and if Isaiah Stewart is locked in as a center, and you now have Paul Reed, who at least to me jumps out as a really nice defensive rim protecting center, this is a deeper center position than Detroit's probably had, at least in recent years. Last year when Mike Muscala was a part of the team for a month or 2, he was a revelation just because of some of the things that he could do, the intensity, the effort that he gave, and then also being able to shoot a little bit. But now you're looking at a center rotation that is young, but you're expecting each of these guys to be able to impact the game in Duren, Stewart, and Paul Reed. Bobby Klintman, again, on the outside looking in. And I guess let's start with Bobby Klintman. Let's work our way up the tiers, I guess, is what I think makes the most sense. Look, Klintman's going to spend a lot of time in the G League this year if I were guessing and reading between the lines, and I think that's smart. He's young. He played overseas last year. needs some experience, needs some development, and needs reps. And it doesn't make sense for him to get those reps right away up with the Detroit Pistons. It makes sense for him to get them in the G League with the Motor City Crews, who have a really, really good staff. I think the Crews did a really good job last year developing guys, and I think you saw that. Guys like Tosan Uwoma, someone like Stanley Amude, and I really like what they're doing down there, and I think it makes sense for Klitman and previewing when we talk about the wings, but Ron Holland as well. I think it makes sense for those guys to go down there, as Detroit now has a little bit more of a aggressive roster, a veteran roster. They have more guys capable of playing NBA minutes. And so it sets up Klitman to go down and play a big role on the G League team. It doesn't mean he'll never play with the Pistons this year. That can happen. I just think it's more likely to happen in the back half of the year, post-trade deadline, if the Pistons are out of the playoff race. Maybe they've moved on from a couple veterans on the team, and they're focused on developing and getting some of the younger guys some minutes at the end of the year. I mean, Mike, anything you feel differently there?
Not really. He should be spending time in the G League. I think that's best for his development. But injuries happen. And Jalen Duren is an injury-prone center, as we've seen, particularly foot and ankle issues, which is typically a bad sign for a center. Isaiah Stewart is pretty tough, but he's dealt with some injuries as well, shoulder injuries. So it's possible that Klitman gets thrust into some more minutes when he, is probably not ready for them. I think the Pistons are going to try to avoid that if necessary, if at all possible, and rely on Paul Reed, because again, he's done this before with injured centers and kind of stepping in and filling a necessary role. And the Pistons could always add another big of a veteran center off the waiver wire. So to me, he's probably not going to get a whole lot of NBA time. I think it's exciting if he does, because we were both pretty impressed with his play in Summer League. I think he looked like his motor looked a little bit like he was running a little bit faster than everybody else in a good way, not in the game is moving too fast for me kind of way. So that's exciting. But if he's playing significant minutes for the Pistons, that means something really bad has happened injury-wise to some of the other starters or regular rotation players that should be ahead of him.
Well, I think he fits in more as a 4. And if he's playing the 5, that's scary, because I just don't think he has the size right now to battle with NBA-sized bigs, NBA-sized centers. And to be fair, I think that's why the Pistons went out and got Paul Reed, because both Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart, as we mentioned, do have a history of missing time. So you need another center capable of giving you minutes. This isn't they didn't want to run back this whole, we have James Wiseman, break glass in case of emergency. We have Marvin Bagley. Like, they wanted to get serious and get guys that could positively contribute for them. And I think that's what Paul Reed is. I think Paul Reed's good enough to be in an NBA rotation. He played for a playoff team in the Philadelphia 76ers. So I think there's a lot of backing to that. So I think you will see him. I just think Klitman, even if you're penciling him in as getting minutes at the 4, you look at the guys ahead of him in the rotation there, it's just tough to see him getting minutes. I think it's more likely that the Pistons have him spend a lot of time in the G League. And moving on to Paul Reed, I think I'm really, really interested to see how he fits in with this team, because I think he's worth a role on your roster, but I don't know exactly where that is on a game-by-game basis if Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart are your starting and backup centers. Paul Reed, again, I think is probably good enough to give you minutes every night, but I don't see him playing over either of them. So I don't know. I like that they brought him in. I'm curious to see how he'll be used, how much he'll be used, and in what role.
So Paul Reed, he's got some stretchiness to him, I believe. I'm trying to pull up his stats here real fast. He was a little bit of a stretch big. He shot 36% on 3 last year after shooting 16% the year before. He could be used as a 4 too. He's probably more of a center though. He's listed as a forward on ESPN for whatever that's worth, but as I said in my weekly drive that's coming on Monday, NBA positions are pretty much boiled down to three now. You're a guard, you're a wing, you're a big. And we have some questions about bigs that we're going to get to later. So I'm trying to avoid kind of talking about those topics if we can, even though I think it's going to be tough to avoid the Bobby Klintman one, because we kind of have already talked about his, where he's going to be hopefully playing this year in terms of his development. But, is there I'm trying to think, do you feel like there's a scenario where, because we're inevitably getting to the topic of Jalen Duren, and Jalen Duren, is he going to be what does he have to do to be cemented in as the starter, not just for this year, but going forward? Because Paul Reed is a stretch five that JB Bickerstaff historically has not really had at his disposal. Jared Allen is not a stretch five. Dean Wade is not. Well, actually, Dean Wade is more of a stretch five, and the Cavs actually performed pretty well with him on the court. But what does Jalen Duren have to do to sort of cement himself as not only the starter for this year, but moving forward into the future? Because we're at a bit of a crossroads with him. He's very young, but the defensive lapses, that doesn't really fly with JB, defensive-minded coach first. And if the offense is not efficient enough, or if he's just getting lost on defense in conjunction, then, the Pistons are going to have to make some decisions. But what does he have to do to be the center for the future?
Well, I think everybody knows it. I think everyone said it. I think Jalen Duren knows it. I think it's defensively for him. He has to take serious steps on that side of the court. He has to be able to impose his size, his strength, his athleticism. He has to be able to be an anchor for the defense inside. And anything he does after that, for me, right now, especially at his age, is gravy. We know he can finish around the rim. We know he can be effective on the glass. I don't need to see him trying to do, 18-footers off the dribble or spotting up and shooting three-pointers. Maybe there's a world where that comes. Again, he's 21 years old, very, very young, and there's plenty of time for his game to expand and develop offensively. But if he doesn't buy in defensively, going into a contract season where he becomes eligible to make well over $100 million, he's going to have a tough time getting that type of contract. And if he doesn't take that step defensively, the Pistons have a serious question there on if he's worth looking at as a key player long-term. I think they do view him as that. There's been some questions about the new front office feeling as strongly about him as the previous regime did. But I still think you look at Jalen Duren and you see a very, very talented player with a sky-high potential. Obviously, the likes of Team USA felt that way, inviting him to their camp in back-to-back years. So I think it starts defensively. I think it starts getting him to lock in and give you 100% on both sides of the court on a nightly basis, and staying locked in and going from there, because he is the starting center on this team. He should be the starting center on this team. And that being said, he still has a lot of room to grow. And for the Pistons to become a better team, it's going to start defensively, and it's going to start with Jalen Duren defensively.
Right. He's the last line of defense. When guys are getting by Jaden Ivey or getting by Cade, the last line of defense at the rim is Jalen Duren. So he needs to be a more aware rim protector. He needs to be a more aware defender in general. Whether he gets dragged out to the perimeter in a pick and roll, how is he going to do? And we've said on some previous podcasts that JB is pretty good at being a defensive first coach, particularly when it comes to centers. And there's really no saying that won't happen again with Duren, because we've seen the talent. The injuries are a little bit concerning as well, particularly because they're foot injuries. And we've seen centers across the league with foot injuries that just never fully recover or they lose something in particular. So that is going to be something to keep an eye on. But I think with the added depth they have behind him, particularly with Paul Reed, he hopefully won't be put in positions where he has to play super heavy minutes, and they have the ability to go to a guy like Reed, who is a different kind of player compared to Jalen Duren. He's able to stretch the floor, gives them a little bit something different on the, bench rotations or as part of the second unit. But the other huge question mark is Isaiah Stewart. And there were some teams this offseason who were interested in Isaiah Stewart. The Oklahoma City Thunder were one of those teams interested. They pivoted to Isaiah Hartenstein instead. But I don't think that buzz is going to go away. He maintains being kind of a tweener at 6'8". So, he's a real true small ball five. If you do play him at the five, he's not good enough of a 3-point shooter on a consistent basis, even though he was one of the better shooters comparatively to the rest of the players on the roster last year. People are not closing out on him super hard at the 3-point line. What do you make of Stewart? What is his role on this team? Is he the backup four? Is he the backup five and Paul Reed's the third center? How is this going to shake out with Isaiah Stewart?
Well, I think that's the clearest pathway to Paul Reed getting a rotation spot in Detroit is if the Pistons do move off of Isaiah Stewart. There were some quieter rumblings towards the end of last year, beginning of the offseason, that Isaiah Stewart might have played his last game as a Detroit Piston. I don't want to, and there's a reason that I haven't, gone out and made this a big deal, because I don't know how much validity there was to that. It's just a few rumblings that you hear here or there, but he's back and he is still a valuable player for this team, even if he's not starting for them. And I think it's a good thing that he's not going to start for them. I think you can pencil in Tobias Harris as the starting four and Jalen Duren as the starting five. I think Stewart, based on what we've read, is going to open the season as the backup five. But if the Pistons do decide to move on from him, maybe that was part of the reason why they brought in Paul Reed, is so that they had someone that could fill the potential role that I think Isaiah Stewart's going to play. Because Stewart and Reed do have some similarities. They both can stretch the floor a little bit. Neither of them are going to do anything with the ball in their hands that shocks you or makes you, all that interested. They're spot up shooters when it comes to hitting shots from the outside. Both were efficient, but I don't think the volume is anything to write home about, especially Paul Reed, less than a 3-point attempt per game. But, he did shoot a number of them. I think with Stewart, him being the backup five has the potential for him to have the best season of his career, because he's going to be asked to do way less than he was asked to do this previous season. And in a smaller role, in a more condensed role, asking him to play backup 5 minutes, maybe shoot a little bit from the 5 spot if he's still able to do that, and not have to play the 4 spot, I think it's just going to do wonders for him. And it's going to open up the offense for the rest of the guys that are out on the court with him. And let's face it, yes, the Pistons added shooting this offseason, but they still have a number of guys where spacing is an issue. Ausar Thompson, Ron Holland, Jaden Ivey, not great as a 3-point shooter, can knock him down, but not some sort of marksman. Teams left him open last year. So you have young guys on your team that struggle to shoot, and you need extra spacing out there when those guys are trying to get downhill and get at the rim where they're best. That allows Stewart to be a 5 on the outside, where I think he could be a lot more effective against defenses. So I think this will be a good role for Isaiah Stewart. I think him coming off the bench behind Jalen Duren is going to do wonders for him this upcoming season.
And there will be people that look at his contract 4 for 64 or 5 and think, how can you have that guy coming off the bench? It's a different world with the CBA. Contracts are very different. Isaiah Hartenstein's making more money. He is better than Isaiah Stewart, but Hartenstein might not be starting. Probably going to be Chet Holmgren. So don't look at the contract and think that that's a failure if he's coming off the bench. That's a good role for him, like you said. He does not need to be a starter. We've tried to play this game with Duren and Stewart before. We have seen the results. And give Stu credit. He shot 38% on threes last year. That was 175 attempts. The year before, he shot 33% on threes on 199 attempts. So 5% increase. He reduced his volume and shot better. So give credit where credit is due. He is making some adjustments, but to be a small ball 5, he's got to play a big 6'8". He's got to play like a Draymond Green-esque level of, defensive intensity and, playmaking and whatnot to be considered as like we can plug him in at the 5 and we'll be fine. But this is a big year for Isaiah Stewart too, because I think his contract is quite tradable as well. 4 for 64 for a guy that brings it off the bench, can shoot the 3 ball. That's a tradable contract. If the Pistons were looking to get out from underneath it, and they already have a glut of wings, which we're going to get into over the next couple of weeks, they have a lot of wings. A lot of guys who could play the 4 as well, like a Tobias Harris, like a Simone Fontecchio. It's possible that if Stewart comes out and isn't shooting the basketball, that you are looking for a different spot for him, a change of scenery, and you're letting the other guys shoot well, because that was something of great need last year, was shooting. So it's going to be tough trying to make some minutes at the 4 work, and we're going to get into wings either next week or the week after. But overall, what's your feeling on the bigs, the quote unquote bigs room for the Pistons? Do you think they need to add somebody? Do you think that this is fine? Do you think anybody on the roster, in this area of the roster at least, is going to be traded? Like, are all 4 of these guys going to be on the team next year? Like, what's your overall sentiment based on what we've heard and seen, what the rotations are going to look like?
I think that this is the best the Pistons center rotation has looked in a little bit. I think each of these guys have different skills compared to one another, which allows you to use them in different situations and exploit those strengths when possible. I think that's something JB Bickerstaff is going to do. And so I like the center group. Each of them have question marks, and obviously Jalen Duren's the biggest name there. Like, he needs to take some serious steps for his long-term potential. But it's promising, the group that they have at the center position, the depth, the talent, the skills there. If these guys, especially Duren, take significant steps forward, you're looking at what I think is going to be a really good group. But can they stay healthy? Will they develop? Those are the questions that we'll be watching for.
Yep. And we're going to be watching in training camp. We're going to be watching in the preseason. And this is a segue to a little news and notes, sort of in-between topic between our mailbag, which we're going to get to in just a moment. So news and notes, Media Day is September 30th. So we're less than 2 weeks away. And by the time a lot of people may be listening, we're like 8 days away, 9 days away. So Media Day is the 30th. You're going to see a bunch of content from us. Maybe Aaron is going. But either way, you're going to see content from us surrounding Media Day. JB Bickerstaff and Trajan Langdon are scheduled to be there, as well as the roster. So there will be a lot to come out of that. I'm going to try not to take too much away, because training camp and Media Day can kind of be a circus, but it'll be nice to be around Pistons basketball again. And then training camp, we don't have an official day for training camp, but last year it started on the 27th, and the Pistons' first preseason game, I think, is October 5th. So I would imagine you're going to get at least a week before the preseason game kicks off that they'll have training camp start. But
it should be starting next week, either the day of Media Day or the day after. I mean, it's pretty tightly connected with when Media Day happens.
Okay. So coming soon. I mean, awfully quick.
It's here.
No, it's here. Yes.
It's
announced. It's here.
For one, the big thing for me for Media Day is getting an idea of what the Pistons think they're going to be. How confident is Trajan Langdon? Do we hear him say some of the same things that Troy Weaver said, or do we hear a little bit more of a concise, like actual plan on how this season plays out, how this roster is utilized? Do we hear from JB Bickerstaff on his vision of how he's going to utilize the roster that Langdon and staff have been putting together over the past few months? Like, I think this is a really big, media day can only be so much. Only so much is truly going to be said. It's not putting guys out on the court 5-on-5 and seeing who can win. But it's a good assessment into where the organization feels they're at. And for me, I think that's intriguing. And I think that the fans in this city, I think now more than in the past few years, have a little bit of a sense of more encouragement, especially after these past two super, super dreadful seasons. But really, it's been the past 4 or 5 years. I just think there's a little bit more optimism this time around with a new regime and a better roster than this organization's had in a while. So I'm excited to see what the energy in the building seems like as we get closer to the year.
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot of what we're trying to do this year, what we're looking for, things like that. And there's a lot to glean from that. There's also a lot of stuff that just isn't going to happen. And you kind of have to sift through that as a consumer to think, okay, do we really think X is going to happen? Maybe not. But it's nice to hear. And you'll be able to hear all of our thoughts on Media Day when it happens. And I'm certain that we'll be doing a podcast about it as well. So training camp could be starting the 30th, maybe October 1st. Again, the first preseason game is the 5th of October. Other news and notes. This isn't on our little topic board here, but Adrian Wojnarowski is retiring from ESPN. And for all of us that have sort of been accustomed to having notifications for Woj on consistently and living and dying by Twitter updates around the trading deadline and seeing what happens, that's a big loss. I mean, there's a world in which, like, he's the third most important basketball figure in the league behind probably LeBron and maybe Steph Curry. I mean, there's a world in which he's like equally important to the game of basketball, with just the Twitter following and the constant monitoring of just what he was saying, who he was talking to. I mean, do you have any thoughts on Woj retiring, just real fast?
I mean, first off, I'd say, younger me, when I got into this, when I got into writing about basketball and talking about basketball, Adrian Wojnarowski was like, basketball Jesus, in the sense of his ability to give you the news, report, break the news. And it sounds silly because we're talking about a basketball reporter, but it's been fascinating to watch how his career unfolded. When he moved into the vertical and then the ESPN, started doing more on camera work, and you caught like him, a guy that was a writer and reporter, learning on the fly on how to do TV hits and things like that. Like, just really, really incredible. I mean, as a basketball fan, if you didn't have Woj Twitter notifications on, were you really even a basketball fan? Just incredible. Like, he reached the top of the mountain when it comes to this industry. I think if he were to do anything else in his career, I know he's going to be the general manager of St. Bonaventure men's basketball, but if he were to do anything else in his career, I pray that he writes a book about his time covering and working in the NBA. I think that would be maybe one of the most must-read basketball books ever written. So that is my hope. But what a career, what a loss it is for the NBA community. I know the big storyline on Twitter right now is who's going to take over for him as like the top newsbreaker. Are any of these big names going to go to ESPN to try to replace him? But man, what a storyline right before the start of the season to lose by far the biggest reporter in the industry.
Yeah, ESPN had a good hit with Adam Schefter and Jeff Passan, who are the two respective Wojs of their sports. You know, Jeff Passan he is to Major League Baseball what Woj was to the NBA. And of course, Adam Schefter is, you know, the NFL Woj, essentially. Doesn't drop as many bombs, but nobody dropped bombs like Woj. I mean, it became a thing. And as to who's going to replace him, I don't think anybody's really going to be able to replace him, because everybody that interacts with him or talks to him has come away just thinking he's such a great guy. Zach Lowe was on his podcast talking about Woj and saying that, you know, Lowe was going to break some news, but he had to take his daughter to a pool party or something, and he couldn't do it. Woj just kind of stepped in and, you know, did it for him. And, you know, I'll say this. He worded his farewell message as saying, you know, he doesn't really need this anymore. Like, he wants to spend his time better, which I think is telling as to how much he spent covering the NBA and to what lengths he did it. Because I wonder what his life had to be like around the trading deadline and around July 1st, just screen time of like 26 hours somehow. I mean, just had to be ridiculous of constantly checking and talking to people and making phone calls. And I just can't imagine that life.
Do you feel like any sort of extra special because the last Woj bomb we ever got was Isaac Okoro returning to the Cavs? I mean, that's got to be special for the folks out in Cleveland.
You know, maybe that's what did him in. He said, I don't need this anymore.
Maybe it was the fad over the last like year or two where you had to start including every single agent included in the free agency deal. I mean, it's changed so much. It went from, you know, it used to be like a 6-word tweet, like, you know, I don't know, Derrick Rose to Memphis, whatever. And then it would, you know, it's turned into this extensive, essentially article
it's a thread
tweet, where we're naming out all 4 agents that did, you know, the legwork on the deal, the notary that watched over the contract signing, the secretary that pushed the paper through, and we're just getting all of these names that no one who's reading the tweet outside of those like in the industry probably care about in the slightest. But it's just how the industry's changed and the type of relationship building, I guess, is the word I'll use there that you have to do. But Woj definitely the top of the top when it came to that. I mean, the time that he spent, the hours that he spent on this, I can't imagine him having, you know, many opportunities to like just not be soaked up in what's going on in the league. I mean, it's got to do it to you when you're in the middle of July and you're having to tweet out at 2 a.m. that, you know, Dwayne Dedmon's returning to the Miami Heat on a 1 veteran minimum contract. Like, that probably is what you know, breaks the back and tells you to hang him up, because at that point, why are you doing it?
Right. So last Woj thing, because there's been a lot of screenshots of some of his more noteworthy Woj bombs. Do you have a Woj bomb off the top of your head that you'll never forget, like where you were, what you were doing, just laughing about it? Because I have an easy one if you want me to go first.
I don't. I'd like to make one up on the fly, but I don't have one. I'm sorry. I didn't come prepared.
Marshawn Brooks and Dylan Brooks the Suns mixing up those two is one of my favorite ones.
Yes.
The Suns thought they were getting Dylan Brooks, but they were actually getting Marshawn Brooks. I think that is just hilarious. That's an all-timer. I remember DeMarcus Cousins signing with Golden State and thinking, good Lord, what is happening?
Yep.
And then if I had to pick maybe one more, gosh, I don't know, the Donovan Mitchell one, because that's the last one that like was holy crap, came out of nowhere. I'm just sitting at my desk. So maybe that was another one. Or, you know, maybe even the NBA having to postpone the season during COVID. That was a pretty startling bomb to get to. Well, happy retirement, quote unquote, retirement to Woj. He's going to probably transform the NCAA and St. Bonaventure with all his NBA connections. It'll, you know, it'd be very interesting to see how his NBA level impacts a team that is a pretty small school that's good at basketball, but, you know, could he turn them into a powerhouse?
All I'll say here, so we can move on to our mailbag questions. I know this isn't why the people came to listen to the show. I'll just say one thing. I think it's really interesting seeing so many very, very respected individuals in the sport, in the industry, taking these GM positions, these NIL leadership positions with different college programs. It seems like a lot of smart people are gravitating to that sector. I just think it's interesting. I don't really have a whole lot more to say on it outside of that. It's interesting. Like, why is that law? I'm very curious. But
chestnut checkers.
I guess I'm one of the fools still playing chess. Or excuse me, I'm one of the fools still playing checkers. These guys are playing chess. I'm too stupid to know how to play chess.
Well, happy retirement to Woj. The NBA community definitely lost, maybe its most noteworthy media person for sure. And with that, we're going to get into the mailbag questions. So we are always taking questions. If you do have a question, you can look to Aaron or myself or Jasper on Twitter or just the Palace of Pistons account in general and send in a question, and we'll be more than happy to talk about it on the podcast. If you could funnel your questions to like the months of like end of July to beginning of September, that'd be great, because we are always looking for anything to talk about. But we do have some questions here. The first one is from Collins_D10. Why don't the Pistons have a red jersey?
Yeah, so we had the Pistons City Edition jerseys come out. They leaked along with a ton. I think the entire league's City Edition coming season got leaked. And it's kind of a play on last year's. Instead of the black and orange, it's like more of a whitish, creamish with the orange. I think they look really good. I think most people online, their reaction is that they're good. But Donovan's question regarding the red jerseys, I agree. Like, the Pistons should have a red jersey. I don't know why I can't stop laughing. But they should have a red jersey. It feels like they should be a part of their regular rotation. It doesn't feel like it should be some sort of, one-off, one-year jersey like the Teals or whatever. It should be with the whites, with the blues. There should be a red there as well. And I think, the last red jerseys that the Pistons had were one of the best jerseys that they've had in recent memory. I think the Pistons had some really bad ones in recent memory. Feels like they're trending in the right direction, though, when it comes to jerseys and putting out better ones. The last year's City Edition was great. I think this year's is really nice. The one that they've used for a few years now that's black and then has the red and blue in it. It's okay. It's not my favorite, but it's not bad either. But they should definitely have a red jersey. I think just when you look at the history of the franchise, it's one of their main colors. Like, it feels like they should have it. And I hope that that's something that eventually gets corrected.
I agree. They should have a red jersey. It's in their main color scheme. They should have a red jersey. I don't know why they don't. I agree. I like the city jerseys. I also like them, especially when looking at some of the other city jerseys around the league, which are just terrible.
Boston has the worst by far.
Boston has the worst by far. Somebody at Nike is not a fan of Boston. They're very unhappy that they won the championship because their jerseys are the worst. They did them dirty.
I like Cleveland's a lot. I think Cleveland's
I do too.
Looks really nice. And the minimalism that we're seeing Nike use with a lot of these teams in their jerseys is the hardest thing, because we used to have really intricate, great designs. In the past few years, it seems like they're doing more of these minimalist type looks. Like, we're seeing like all these companies do these minimalist logo changes now, where they look really plain and whatnot. So now Nike's trying to do that with NBA jerseys. And it's not working. The Pistons got lucky. Cleveland got lucky. They've got a couple of the nice ones, but there's probably more bad ones than there are good ones at this point. And it's ones
by far
effort into them that look the worst, or ones that look like they're just repetitions from last year, maybe a word change or whatever. So that's disappointing. But overall, Pistons one looks good. And to wrap this up, the Pistons need a red jersey as part of the franchise's jersey rotation moving forward.
They do. Yes. Maybe we can put a picture of the leaked jersey in the YouTube feed, just like place it there while we talk over it. Okay, next question is from @StatStuffer. If Duren's defense does not improve this season, is it time to move on from him? So we kind of answered this a little bit in our Bigs talk, but is it the end all be all if his defense doesn't improve in year one after a new head coach comes in and tries to instill some things?
I would lean towards looking elsewhere for your center spot. If there's not growth there, like there needs to be some growth. I'm not saying he has to take some, leap into being a top 10 defensive center in the league, but there has to be some growth because last year was really bad. And you're talking about this being a contract year where Jalen Duren's going to be up for a contract worth over $100 million. And when you're talking about building out your franchise and committing to core players, are you committing to a center that can play defense, but also isn't like some super versatile offensive weapon? Like he's a good rim runner, dunker spot type guy. It doesn't revolutionize your offense either. So if he's not improving on defense, if he's not showing that he's getting better, it doesn't all have to click this year. But if he does not improve, I would, especially considering where you're at with his contract, I would be looking at moving on from him.
It will raise a lot of questions if he doesn't get better with a head coach that is such a strong defensive-minded presence and has experience working with young centers or young bigs just in general and turning them into really good defenders. So it will be a bit of a red flag if he stays the same or, God forbid, regresses and gets worse. I think if there's some minimal growth, that's probably the worst case scenario because then you're in kind of a bad position of if you think he can improve even further, then might be entitled to give him a contract, but it might not be super confident in that contract. It's kind of the Isaiah Stewart problem where he obviously had utility, but you weren't super comfortable with it. Is it time to move on from after one season if he doesn't, show dramatic improvement? I think they're going to at least have to give him another half season with JB. Injuries could affect that as well. If he's injured and can't play, then that's going to impact things if they're going to give him a contract. So I'm inclined to say if he stays the same, probably thinking about other options, but I don't think they're going to move on from him until he gets another half a season plus this year with Bickerstaff. Maybe he is evidently the weak link on an otherwise good roster, and then you're kind of your hand's been forced, but we'll have to see. It's a big year for Jalen Duren. I think it's what we're really getting at throughout all these podcasts for the last couple weeks. From Patrick H. Mast, thoughts on Ausar Thompson starting at shooting guard? Should he be the starting power forward? And I did skip one. I didn't miss it. But first on Ausar Thompson, starting at shooting guard, what do you think? And should he be the starting power forward instead?
Yeah, so James Edwards III of The Athletic, who since writing this has moved on to the New York Knicks beat position at The Athletic, suggested Ausar Thompson starting at shooting guard this upcoming season. I wrote about it on palaceofpistons.com. I'd highly suggest you go there and check it out. Some of my thoughts on it. The pluses to it are it immediately helps your defense. It gives you your best defender on the team. It puts him on the court, allows him to guard the opposing team's best guards. Okay, Cunningham doesn't have to do it, and it gives you extra rebounding, extra athleticism. So he does bring you some good things. But the negatives to it are it puts one less ball handler on the court. Let's say the starting lineups: Cade Cunningham, Ausar Thompson, Simone Fontecchio, Tobias Harris, and Jalen Duren. Really, the only true ball handler on the court there is Cade Cunningham. And it's just a wonky fit in terms of putting another non-shooter on the court. I do not think he should be starting at shooting guard. I don't think he should be starting overall. I think he should be coming off the bench. I just think it makes the most sense. I think you need to prioritize shooting and another ball handler. I think Jaden Ivey makes more sense at the 2 spot. And then obviously you have Tobias Harris at the 4 spot. My 3 spot would be Simone Fontecchio, and then obviously Cunningham and Duren rounding out the starting 5. So I would say that Ausar Thompson should come off the bench. I know a lot of people disagree with that, and that's totally fine, but that's how I feel on the situation.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I kind of hope that he forces his way into the discussion as the starting 2. I also think he could be the starting 5. I think he's a very athletic wing. He can scale up defensively. And
Clarify.
I'm sorry, what I say?
5. I assume you mean starting 4.
Yeah, I mean the starting 4. I don't. That's like mega small ball.
They'll come at you in the comment section. So I just wanted to correct that.
Yeah, no. Starting 4, and we've talked about this in the past. Jasper has been a big proponent of putting Ausar Thompson at the 4 in the past, and he can definitely scale up and play that and body up 1 through 4, which is really, that's a nice tool to have in your bag if you were JB Bickerstaff. But yeah, I think for right now, I don't really see him as the 2 unless you're getting some playmaking somewhere else. If Jalen Duren is turning into like Evan Mobley light, where he could do some playmaking out of the elbow, that's kind of nice to see. But even then, the Cavaliers had 2 ball handlers the last 2 years with Mitchell and Garland sharing the floor. And even when they didn't have Garland for whatever injury purposes, they had Craig Porter Jr. out there too. So you always had 2 ball handlers at any given time. And I don't think that they can afford to do that this time around with Ausar Thompson at the 2, unless you're getting that from somewhere else. Unless you have a, LeBron-esque small forward who can also like basically be a point guard. And that's not what Fontecchio or Tobias Harris or Ausar Thompson are, then I don't think that there's a case to start him at the 2 for right now. That's not to say you can't get there, but as of right now, I think him coming off the bench makes the most sense, unless he's, becoming a much better 3-point shooter, which as of right now, we just don't think it's going to happen. At least not yet. Okay. I skipped over a question. I will go back. This is from @ThrownOff. Do you expect Klintman to get NBA minutes at power forward given the lack of depth?
I do not. Like I said earlier, I think he's G League bound for at least the first half of the season, which I think is going to be great for him. And it's going to be great for the Motor City Cruise. Towards the end of the season, if the Pistons are out of the playoffs, that's when I see Bobby Klintman getting some more run, assuming the Pistons trade off, move away from some of these guys that were brought in or on the roster and have value at the trade deadline. If they decide to move off of any of those guys, that maybe opens up a role for him. Otherwise, it would have to be, there'd have to be an injury or something to really, I think, see him get minutes early on in the year.
Yep, we talked about this pretty extensively. He should be with the Motor City Cruise to start. That's where he's going to get a lot of run. If he's on the NBA roster, he's not going to get as much play time, even with the lack of depth. I don't see him getting NBA minutes unless there is a series of serious injuries that kind of forces the Pistons' hand. Okay, this is from @Detroit Sport 00. How long will the Pistons remain a bottom 5 team?
So the Pistons have been a bottom 5 team for the last 5 years, since the 2019-20 season. Unfortunately, the year before that was the last year they made the playoffs. That's when they went 41-41 under Dwayne Casey. It was Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond, that group. But then after that, they've been a bottom 5 team ever since. And I would have to say, if the Pistons are a bottom 5 team again this year, that's probably a problem. And if they're a bottom team after this season, then it's really, really a problem, because you have several core players that you're building around, and now you're starting to spend a little bit on pieces that fit around them. If these guys aren't good enough to get you out of the bottom 5, that's a problem. You can only be so bad for so long. And I think it needs to be sooner rather than later that the Pistons get themselves out of this conversation. I think the Pistons should be out of that conversation this upcoming year. I don't think they should really be a bottom 5 team when I look at their roster. That being said, one injury to Cade Cunningham drastically changes everything. But if they're relatively healthy and they're a bottom 5 team again, I would be a little bit concerned. I think this is the last year that there's any sort of being able to accept that. And if they're doing it beyond this year, there's a real problem, and you have to start looking at some really core fundamental changes to the team.
Yeah, that's just bad juju to think that they're going to be a bottom 5 team again. I think that they've made enough changes to the roster and the coaching staff to no longer be a bottom 5 team in the league. And I think there's a lot of teams that are quickly falling to those depths. Stairs in Brooklyn Nets, stairs in Toronto Raptors, who, could be good, could be terrible. And Cooper Flag is going to be coming out in the next draft, and there will be a lot of teams that want to try and get as many ping pong balls as possible. Maybe the Pistons are one of them. I kind of hope that they're not, even though Flag would obviously be awesome. I do want to see good basketball, and I want to see growth. So, and like you said, bottom 5 for half a decade now in a row is not good. And to have this to show for it is not super encouraging either. So I'm going to say that they're not going to be a bottom 5 team this year. I'm going to say that they're going to be a bottom 7 team, but that is improvement. And I think that they've made enough free agency moves to really insulate themselves from being a bottom 5 team. You have veterans on the roster. You have young guys coming into their own. I think fans will be pleasantly surprised with how much better the Pistons look with veterans on the roster and a coach that's actively not sabotaging the players on the court and putting out all bench lineups and doing some crazy stuff like that. Okay, last question. This is from @RoadGameSports. What does the shooting guard rotation look like this season with a glut of options, specifically listing Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Ausar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and Ron Holland?
So as I mentioned when we were talking about Ausar Thompson a little bit earlier, I view Jaden Ivey as this team's starting shooting guard. I think there's a world where Malik Beasley starts at shooting guard, but I think both of them are locks for minutes. Obviously, Ausar Thompson's going to get minutes. I don't think it has to be at the 2-guard spot. I think he could play the 3. I think he could play the 4. I think the same thing could be said for Tim Hardaway Jr., not just a 2. He can also, filter him as a 3. Again, NBA is pretty much getting to the point where it's positionless in the sense of it's no longer that traditional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's really like ball handler, big, and wings, guys that shoot, defend, essentially. So Tim Hardaway Jr., can get minutes at either of the wing spots. Someone like Ron Holland might not be in the rotation at the beginning of the season. I'd be willing to venture he's not, considering all of the options that Detroit has between 2 through 4. It's just really hard for me to see him getting consistent minutes. So I think he's on the outside looking in, but I think Ivy, Ausar, Beasley are all locks for the rotation. I think Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to get some minutes at one of the wing positions. So Detroit has a lot of options. They have a lot of different guys that they could try to plug and play and see what works. And I think that's a great step forward compared to last year when you were playing Killian Hayes and it was Isaiah Livers and whoever else you were picking up off of waivers or bringing up from the G League. So Pistons are in a better spot there with a lot more competition. But figuring out who the right shooting guard is next to Cade Cunningham in the starting lineup, that's a big question, and one I'll be looking for the answer for.
Yeah, do you view Marcus Sasser as a 2 or a 1?
He's a 2 in the sense that he doesn't have the skills of a 1, but he's sized as a 1. He's 5'11", 6 foot, and isn't really a point guard when it comes to having the ball handling or the passing skills needed. But I don't see real minutes for him at the 2-guard spot either, considering all these names that we just mentioned. And so maybe the plan with him, not to go off on a tangent, but maybe the plan with him is to have him spend a lot of time in the G League this upcoming season and really see if he can develop the skills of a 1 and see if, there's a future there. But I don't know where he fits in right now. Maybe the Pistons, look at all these options that they have and they decide to bring Jaden Ivey off the bench at the backup point guard spot. And that makes, Sasser playing in the G League a little bit more feasible because they don't really have another point guard option outside of Cunningham or Ivy. But I just don't see a real role for Sasser right now. I think he'd have to become more of a point guard to get minutes, just considering how many guys can play the 2.
Yeah, he's kind of being pushed out. You have a lot of guys. And, some of these are going to be playing the 3. Malik Beasley can play the 3. Ron Holland could play the 3. Ausar Thompson can play the 3. Tim Hardaway Jr., like you said, is going to play one of the wing spots. He could play the 3 in some small ball situations. So there's going to be a lot of fluidity within this quote unquote shooting guard rotation. And that's why we talk about positionless basketball, because Ivy can play the 1 or the 2. Ausar can play the 2, the 3, or the 4. Ron Holland can play the 2 or the 3. And, maybe he develops into a 4 because he's got the athleticism. There's just no way of telling. The rotation, I could not tell you what the rotation is going to look like. I feel like it will be Jaden Ivey, and they're going to try wholeheartedly Ivy and Cunningham and see how it works, because they know that they have good depth behind them now. They're not going to be reliant on them playing well together. You can always mix and match. You could stagger, which JB has done in the past with the Cavaliers. So my guess is Jaden Ivey gets the first crack at starting 2-guard spot with good depth behind him in Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. in the event that you need to push him to play some primary ball handler and take him out of the 2-guard spot. Not having a backup point guard is something that I think will be very important to watch for in training camp, especially if there's an injury, especially if Sasser is not good.
I'm still wondering if Detroit will use that final roster spot on a one more guard piece, specifically a point guard, because it feels like they should probably have one more option there.
Yeah, I mean, even a Corey Joseph-esque veteran to come in and just soak up some minutes.
PTSD for some Pistons fans with that name right there. We need to put your discretion is advised now over the podcast. Sorry, folks.
Not a full-blown Corey Joseph, but a veteran that is Corey Joseph-esque that probably won't kill you as a backup point guard. He's also not going to win you a basketball game, and no, Malachi Flynn doesn't really count. But another stable veteran to come in and kind of just pace the second unit as a backup point guard. I think that's like one glaring thing that they didn't really address this offseason. Maybe they have a plan for it. There's still time. But as far as the 2-guard spot, I mean, would you agree that it's probably going to be Jaden Ivey getting a crack at it first?
I would like to agree personally. Like, that's who I would start at the 2-guard spot. But I also feel like, looking at the roster, they might have him come off the bench as the backup point guard behind Cade Cunningham. They could start both of them, bring one off before the other, and then have him replace the guy that stayed on, which is what I would do personally. But I don't know if the Pistons will do that. So if it's not Jaden Ivey, maybe it is Ausar Thompson. I think maybe Beasley's a dark horse candidate to start as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Beasley's a good shooter, 3-point contest participant last year. It's definitely possible. And that is all of our questions for the mailbag. This is a good mailbag. I like doing this. If we could end like every pod with like 2 or 3 questions, I think that'd be awesome.
These are fun. I enjoy these for sure. I hope the listeners do. And if you have more questions, definitely let us know.
Yep, let us know in the comments on YouTube, or you can just find us on Twitter and yell at us that way, which is always allowed. Aaron, do you have any thoughts before we wrap up this podcast? Any last thoughts that you have?
I do. Look,
I know that you did.
A couple things. First off, wherever you're watching or listening from, please take half a second, hit the follow, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Spotify, particularly, because we've seen some growth there, leave us a comment. Make sure you're following us on Spotify, but leave us a comment as well. Really want to see what the people on Spotify have to say. So definitely let us know what you think of the show. Give us a question to talk about. Talk to us there. You certainly can. And I want to just see the response there is on Spotify. On YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, drop us a comment. All that stuff helps. Really, really appreciate your support there. And then the Substack again, one more time, palaceofpistons.com. Please go check it out. Please go subscribe. It's free. And then make sure you're following us on all of our socials. Most active on Twitter at AJohnsonNBA and at Palace of Pistons. Appreciate you guys and excited for the season ahead as we get closer and closer.
Yes, we don't have that many podcasts left before we're talking about training camp, and training camp is actually happening. Same thing with the preseason. And that's very exciting. I don't know about you. I'm kind of over the NFL. I tweeted that out. I'm like, I'm kind of over the NFL. All these injuries happening, and these games where there's no scoring. And people are complaining about too high coverage. I'm just tired of it. I'm ready. I'm personally ready for some NBA basketball to come back.
I'm ready for the NBA. I am not sick of the NFL yet, but it's definitely depressing how many injuries there have been. Maybe you're just mad that you can't get Nick Chubb for me in fantasy football right now. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's why you're out of the NFL.
That is a big bummer, but then I saw a report from the Browns beat that said he might not come back to week 10 or 11. So
you're breaking my heart.
So that's okay by me. I may be 1-9 by that time anyway, because of all these freaking injuries. I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the Washington Commanders winning on 7 field goals. I think that's where I hit my limit of, okay, we have a problem in the NFL. 21 points, all to the kicker. I don't think I could do this anymore. So, okay, before we get into NFL talk or anything else, we're going to wrap up this edition of the podcast. Thank you all for listening so much. I'd like to thank our sponsor this week. That is BetOnline, and that is always BetOnline. They've been a noble sponsor for years now, so definitely check out BetOnline. For Aaron Johnson, I'm Mike Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network, and we will see you all next time.